Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Mr. Wiz here. So if you are new to this channel, we build video games. Right now we are working our way through some beginner Unity lessons. If you haven't seen my old videos, I recommend you check them out because they do work best if you watch them in order. So right now, I have this world that we've been creating over the last several videos, and today I want to enhance it with some better lighting effects. So this video will be all about lighting. I'm not sure how long I will spend on this video, whether I'll make it one part or two parts. Haven't quite decided yet, but I want to make sure I cover all the basics that will help you build really good lighting in your worlds, because lighting effects are a great way at adding realism and special effects to the worlds that you create in Unity. So right now I have this world that I've already created. I've spent some time on. It looks pretty good. In the last video we added sound. Let me see, is the sound still turned on here? I don't remember if I muted it yet or not. But we added objects like trees, we added terrain, we added buildings. In the last video, we added sounds. Okay, so I already have this muted. Good. That'll make it easier for you guys to hear me. So right now, as far as lighting goes in my world, there's only one form of light, and that's the directional light. And I do have it coming from the sunset, which looks really good. It adds a lot of realism to my world. Just a quick reminder on how I did that. I found a skybox that I liked. I put it in my world, and then I had to edit the directional light so that it lined up with the sun that was on the skybox. Because skyboxes are really just, if I zoom out here, skyboxes are really just 360 pictures, right? So I've got this 360 picture of the sky. It's beautiful. The sun's over there. And in order to make sure that the shadows in my world lined up with that sun, I had to set up the directional light correctly. So to do that, I selected the directional light. Now, I did this in a previous video, so I'm just kind of recapping here. I selected the directional light. I used the F key on my keyboard to zoom in on it, like that. And then I used the rotational tool, and oh, my gizmos are turned off. Hold on, let me turn my gizmos back on so you can actually see it. There we go. When you turn gizmos off, you can't see all the stats. So this is the directional light. If you probably recognize it if you've seen them before. They look like this, right? They got those yellow lines that are showing you the direction of the light. So as I was saying, to make sure it was lined up with my world, all I had to do was line up the directional light with the sun in my world and make sure the lines were pointing at me, right? As long as the lines are pointing at me when I focus these together like this, that means the light is pointing the right way. So if the sun's over there, the light should be shining from the sun. And to double check it, I just need to kind of hover it over the sun and make sure the lines are pointing this way towards me, towards the computer screen, right? So that worked really good in this world. You can also, of course, change some of the stats on the directional light, such as the color and the intensity. So 1 is the default intensity for directional light. So that's kind of a standard sunlight brightness. But you could lower this if you're doing moonlight. I would use a number less than 1. You may also want to change the color in certain circumstances. Normally, I don't change the color for sunlight, but if I'm doing moonlight, I might make it more of a white color or sometimes even a bluish color. If you're doing a game on an alien planet, maybe you have a red sun on the alien planet, you might want to change this color to red. So it just makes sense for whatever your game, however your game works. Make sure the directional light matches that. So directional light is super important in all of your games because it is the main source of light in your world. It is the sunlight, it is the moonlight, it is the light that lights up your map. So with that said, it's not the only light that's lighting up this map. The skybox itself is also adding to the lighting in the map. So if you ever noticed when you change your skybox, it kind of changes the way the light works. So right now I'm going to change this bright sunny skybox to a darker one. Let's try this one here. Boom. Immediately, my entire world got darker, right? If I drive around, there's not nearly as much light as there was before. So the skyboxes themselves also improve the lighting of your environment. Here's how you can change that if you ever wanted to change that. If you go to Window, you can go down here to where it says Rendering, and there's an option for lighting. So once again, that was Window, Rendering, Lighting. So if you go here, these are basically the lighting stats of your game. and you can go to where it says environment. This is the only one we're going to mess with right now. You have the skybox material, which I already have set up. You have the sun source, which is the directional light, which I already have set up. And then you've got some other things here. So where it says environmental lighting, you'll see it says source, skybox. I don't normally mess with this because it tends to work pretty well. So if you have a bright skybox, the world is bright. If you have a dark skybox, your world is dark. It just kind of makes sense. But you can technically change it. So if you just wanted the environmental lighting to be a particular color, a certain aura, right? You could do that. But typically, I would just leave it at skybox. I rarely ever change this. But I wanted you to see it in case you ever decided to change it. So environment, so once again, it was lighting, window, rendering, lighting. And then from here, you can choose the environment lighting source. You can also change its intensity. Again, I rarely ever change this, but it is an option. Down here is some pretty interesting stuff. Do you see where it says fog? What do you suppose that does? I can click on fog, and I just put fog on my world. Let's zoom in to my character so you can see this a little bit better. If I zoom in on the character, you'll see around the character is not much different, but there's definitely fog on my map. So it's kind of creating a hazy effect. It's not physical fog in the sense that I won't be driving through clouds, but what it creates is it creates a haze. So objects farther away are just harder to see, right? So this is the kind of foggy haze that you might catch early in the morning or late at night. If you're building a spooky game, a horror game, this kind of effect is pretty nice because it can kind of change the feel of the game, right? You can't see as far ahead of you because of that haziness. So yeah, the fog effect's kind of cool, honestly. I like it. I might leave it on in this game. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be adding lighting to my world. So I actually do want it to be a darker world. So using this darker skybox is going to work well for me. I'm going to close the lighting box because I don't plan on making any more changes there. For the directional light, let's make sure it lines up with the new moon here. So I'm going to select it. I'm going to press F on my keyboard while I'm hovering over the scene view. That way I can zoom in on the directional light. And now I'm going to hold down the Alt key to change my angle and make sure it is coming from the moon. So right now it is not. It's aiming too far down. So I need this to line up with the moon. I can zoom out so I don't have to worry about the whole world here. It's a little bit easier for me. So I'm lining the circle up with the moon. And now I'm going to rotate it so those lines are pointing towards the camera. When I say camera, I mean my camera, not the player's camera. Pointing towards me, right? Okay, so now the moonlight is in the right direction. And I do want to change the brightness since this is the moon. I don't want it to be a 1. How bright is the moon, I wonder? I could probably look it up, but I'm not going to. It's partially cloud covered. It's going to be pretty dark. I'm going to go with like 0.5. If I don't like it, I can always change it. But I'm looking for a number less than 1 is the idea, right? I could change the color. Let's not do that yet. Let's just see what this looks like right now. So this is not bad. I do think the yellowish color doesn't quite fit my game, though. So let's change the yellowish color for the light. And let's make it more of a light blue color. Because I'm going for a color similar to what I see in the sky there is what I'm going to be going for. Actually, I wonder if I could select the color of the sky. Does that work? I know there is an eyedropper here. Does it? Oh, it does. Ho ho. So let me pick a color similar to what I see in the actual moonlight itself. One of these light shades of blue, maybe. Which one do I want to go for? Something like that? Let's try that. All right. So now I'm creating a light grayish blue color at 0.5 intensity. Let's take a look at it. Oh, I like this. I like this a lot. That seems to fit my world pretty well. Pretty well. And I think I'll keep that fog effect because I do kind of like it for the nighttime look. All right. So that's the basics of directional light. There are other things you can change, but I don't really recommend it. These are all pretty good effects. Just these here. So before we leave directional light, there's one more thing I should probably mention about it. Directional light is not coming from one particular area. I know, yes, I lined it up with the moon, but what I mean by that is there's not an object in your sky that is creating directional light. It's just coming from a direction, but not an area. So what I mean by that is that if I grab the directional light and I move it to a different part of my map, look at the shadows on my trees. I want you to notice they're not changing at all. Moving my directional light does literally nothing. Literally nothing. I can put the directional light wherever I want to, and nothing happens because it's not an actual object. It's not something in my sky like a sun or a moon. It's just a direction that the light is coming from. So moving it does nothing. What does change it is rotating it. So if I rotate it, then you'll see all the shadows moving, right? And I'm going to undo that to go back to the one that I lined up so well. Okay, cool. I just wanted you guys to see that. So when you're messing with directional light, the position means nothing. It's the rotation that matters. And then, of course, the stats over here that matter. All right, so what other kind of lights can you put in your world? This is where things get really, really fun for me. So if I go over here to the hierarchy and I want to create a new object, I'm going to click on the name of the scene, which is just called sample scene for me. And I can create, obviously we have our 3D objects, which we've created in past videos. But I want you to notice in this same area where we're creating 3D objects, there's also a section that says create light. So we are going to create light. In the light section, we have different options. We have directional light, which we already have in our game. We don't need another one. Unless you're building a game that has more than one sun, you don't really need more than one directional light, right? Then we have point lights, spotlights, and area lights. So today, we're just going to look at point lights and spotlights. So a point light is basically a point of light. It is an object that is giving off light in all directions. So you might think of it like an actual light bulb, where if you turn on a light bulb and it shines lights in all directions, right? You might think of it like a candle or a fire in a campfire. It's putting off light in all directions, all around it. That's a point light. It's a point of light that shines all around it in an area. Then you have spotlights. Spotlights are lights that are focused on one particular spot. It's like a flashlight. So if you're holding a flashlight, it's shining the light in front of you. It's not shining the light behind you. It's not shining the light to your left side or your right side. It's pointing the light in front of you. Spotlights are shining in one area, in like a cone shape, if you think about it that way. So a good example of spotlights are flashlights. Also, high beams on a car would be spotlights. Street lights, where the light points straight down on the sidewalk, that would be a spotlight. So these are the basic lights that we're going to be talking about today. Point lights, which shine in all directions, and spotlights, which point in one direction. So for now, I think I'm going to add a spotlight to my player. So I'm going to go ahead and create a spotlight, but I think I'm going to make it a child of Prometheus. So Prometheus is the name of my car, if you weren't here for the previous videos. I got this car here as the main player. I'm going to give the car headlights. So I'm going to give him actually 2 spotlights, one for each headlight, and that will make it easier for me to see as I'm driving around in the dark. If you don't have a car in your world, if you use something else, you should still go ahead and follow along with me. So if you're doing like a first-person perspective and you have somebody walking around your world, you may imagine that you're giving him a flashlight, right? So you might only need 1 instead of 2 like I'm going to have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Prometheus, which is my character. So whatever your character's name is, select him, right-click on them. We're going to create a light, and we're going to create a spotlight. So since I did this as a child, it is focused on the center of the car right now. So there is my spotlight. If I check it from another angle, you'll see it. It's in the bottom center of the car, and it's pointing that way. So it's already pointing a good direction for me. That's good. So I'm going to go ahead and move it so that it is lined up with one of my headlights. So I'm going to do my best to try to line it up with this headlight right here. And I can even zoom in a little bit, get a better look at it here. So I can see the cone. It's not quite lined up. It still has it a little too deep. So I'm going to do my best to line it up pretty well with the headlight on the car. And I'm going to check it from different angles to give it the most realistic look. Okay, I think I may have done it. Looks like it's lining up pretty good with the headlight in the car. I could probably back it up a little bit, but that's pretty decent. All right, so I only have it coming from the left headlight right now. Let's look at the stats for it. So for my spotlight on the right-hand side, it is spot type. You can change light types after you make them, just so you know. But it is spot type because I set it up as a spotlight. It has a range of 10. So right now, my headlight only shoots 10 meters in front of me. I could change that if I wanted to. I could give it a bigger range if I felt like I needed to. The spot angle, this is important. So the spot angle has to do with how wide the cone is that the spotlight is creating. So I could make it much wider, or I could make it less wide. I just have to kind of decide what looks best when I start driving it around. So what was it originally? 30? I'll leave it at 30 for now. So I have a color. I'm just going to leave it as white light right now. For headlights, it makes sense that it would be a white light. Same thing if you had a flashlight. It would make sense that it would be a white light. It probably won't have a color to it. Mode. Mode is important. Let's talk about mode. With lights, you have a couple different modes. You have real-time, you have mixed, and you have baked. A real-time light means that the light and the shadows that it casts will be changing as you play. So, since this light is moving with the character, the light will be moving the whole time I'm driving. The things that the light hits and casts shadows will be changing as I'm playing because the light is constantly moving. So this is a perfect example of something that should be real-time light. Because it's constantly changing, it needs to be updating in real time, okay? Baked lighting is something that doesn't need to update ever. So this is more of what I would think of as a decorative light. Maybe your game has a lighthouse up on top of a mountain, and that lighthouse is constantly giving off light. That's a decoration. You don't really need that to constantly be updating. You can leave that as baked, which means it happens once and it just stays that way. Basically, the light is created in your game and is then frozen in your game. So real time means it's constantly updating. Baked means it doesn't update ever. Mixed is something that's a combination of the two. So if there's a light in your game that most of the time doesn't change, but occasionally maybe something might walk in front of it, so it might create shadows differently, right? So maybe it's a light that's on a wall, and most of the time it's fine, but every once in a while a character might walk by it and cast a shadow. So if it's something like that, where it sometimes needs to update, but doesn't always need to update, that would be mixed. So real time is updating regularly, baked is never updating, mixed is updating sometimes. So why does this make a difference? Why don't we leave everything set to real time when it comes to lights? Because it slows down your game, right? It can cause lag. It can cause the whole game to take more memory, to take more processing power, because it's having to constantly calculate lights. Calculating lighting is actually pretty advanced. It takes a lot of math to calculate how light bounces off different things and how the shadows are going to be formed. It takes a lot of math. So we only use real time when we need to. But in this case, the light needs to be updating constantly because the car's moving, the player's moving, so I have to leave it in real time or it won't work correctly. Intensity is the brightness, so that should be fine. Indirect multiplier has to do with how much light bounces off of other things. Normally I don't worry about that one unless I end up with a situation where it's reflecting way too much, then I might change it. But normally I don't mess with that. Halo, I don't usually mess with either. So halo basically creates a glow, as you can see right there. So if you want something to actually glow, you can give it a halo, but I never do that. The only time you might make something glow like that would be if it's a treasure chest that's supposed to bring the player in, or some sort of object that is creating light and is shining and glowing in an aura. Otherwise, I don't use halo. Shadow type is important. So what kind of shadows is my light creating? If it's set to no shadows, that's not very realistic usually. So you have hard shadows and you have soft shadows. From the point of processing power, hard shadows create less lag. They're a lot easier to process for the computer than a soft shadow. But soft shadows do look more realistic. So just keep that in mind. So a hard shadow creates strong lines, whereas a soft shadow creates lines that kind of have a soft edge to them. That's the only real difference. So like I said, hard shadows are less realistic looking, but faster processing time. Soft shadows are more realistic, but take longer to process. So it's really up to you. For my headlights, I think I'm going to use hard shadows for my headlights. Okay, so here I can change stats about the shadows. I rarely ever mess with these. I tend to just leave them alone. So once again, I have one spotlight on my car. I kept the range of 10. I kept the spot angle 30. I didn't really change any of these other than the real time. So mode is set to real time. Everything else is pretty much the same. I did change the shadows to hard shadows. Let's test it. So I only have one headlight right now, coming from the right side of my car. Okay, so there you can go. You can see it's shining on that rock right there, right? It's not very bright. It's not a very long range. I'm thinking I probably need to give it a bigger range. Let's see how it works when I go driving up towards my buildings over here. Now keep in mind, I do have my world muted, which is why you don't hear the music and stuff that I added in a previous video. Yeah, so definitely not much range to my light. I feel like I could probably also make it a lot brighter. So let's edit it some. So let's give it a bigger range. How big of a range should I give it, you guys think? 10 is definitely not enough. Maybe 30? 30 is pretty good. I like that. I think I'm going to leave the angle the way it is. I actually kind of like the angle. Intensity should be more, though. Let's make it brighter headlights. 2 is pretty good. 3 is really bright. Let's try it with 3, though. I want to see what that looks like. Oh, wow, that's really bright. Looks good, though. Look at how much it lights up the world as I'm driving around. Yeah, that's kind of good. What does 2 look like? So I'm just playing around with this. Let's see. Two is good, too. I think 2 is probably more realistic. Yeah, let's go with 2. All right, so I like my lights. I like the stats. I'm going to duplicate it so I can put one on the other headlight. So Control D to duplicate. And now I'm going to move this one to the other side of the car. And let's check it and make sure it lines up with the headlight. All right, close. Let's bring it over a little bit more. Boom, boom, boom. So I'm just changing its X position. Everything else I'm going to keep the same. All right, so now I have 2 headlights coming from my left and right. And there I go. And I can see things pretty well here in the dark. And you can see it's creating some good shadows for the trees. You guys see that shadow? That's awesome. So that's the benefit of the real-time lighting. And the hard shadows actually works pretty good, I feel like. I don't think soft shadows were needed for this. Boom. You know, it is pretty narrow. I should probably make it a little bit wider so I can see better. So go ahead and adjust your lighting. So if you're doing a car, you might want to keep it similar to mine. If you're doing, yeah, I'm going to try 50 for the range on both of them. If you're doing a person, you probably only need one because it's like a flashlight that the player is holding, right? But create your spotlights. So now they're wider, so you can see more. Yeah, that works pretty well. I think I'm going to leave it there. So I did 50 for my angle for both. And I got a pretty good headlights. Yeah, this is awesome. All right. So I feel like I'm done with the spotlights. Feel free to add spotlights in other parts of your world. So for instance, you might want to download a lamp. If you go to the Unity Asset Store, there's a lot of free things. I did a search for lamps earlier, and I found some cool ones. So if you want to do something like this would be a great example of something that would probably also use a spotlight. So these cone shapes are great for spotlights because they just point straight down. And then you would have to adjust the angle to the right width for that light, right? So to create a circle light basically below it, which is pretty realistic, pretty cool. So that's a great use for spotlights as well. Okay, so I've got great spotlights here as headlights in my car. Let's make something with a point light real quick, and then we'll wrap up this video. So in my world, I had some buildings back here. I want to put some lights on some of these buildings. Let me fly over here. If you're not familiar with the navigation tools I'm using right now, you can right-click on your mouse and then use WASD, Q, and E to fly around your map. So I've got these buildings. Let's put a light on one of these. Here we go. You'll use this building. So I'm going to put a light above this door. It's kind of dark right now, so that would be a great place for a light. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create basically a light bulb, okay? So in my hierarchy over here, with the sample scene selected, we're going to go ahead and create a 3D object, and I'm going to create a sphere. So that's going to be the basis of my light bulb. Now, of course, you could download a model or something to use. Instead, I'm just creating the bulb to keep it simple for myself. So I'm creating a sphere, and we're going to put that sphere on the building. Oh, you know what I could have done? I could have created it as a child. Let's go ahead and make it a child of this building. So this is Village House V3. I'm going to drag and drop it into Village House, and now it's a child of that object, just to keep things simple. Okay, so let's line it up and put it in front of the door. Obviously, it's way too big right now, so let's shrink it down with the scale tool. I'm going to try to make it appropriate size for a light that might be above the door. Let me use my focus tool with the F button to zoom in on it some more. All right, so I'm still a little ways away. I want it to basically, there we go. So that's where it touches. So I want it to just basically barely touch the edge there. All right, it's a little off center, so let's move it a little bit to be kind of center with the door. That seems pretty close. What do you guys think? Oh, still a little off center. Move a little bit to the right there. There we go. So, okay, so I have this light bulb above the door, and this is going to be a point light. So it's going to shine in all directions, not in one direction like a spotlight did. So this will also be, like I said, a light bulb. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to give it a texture that glows like a light bulb. So if I go to my material folder where I have my materials, I'm going to right-click. I'm going to create a new material. We talked about this a while back, but it's been a while, but I don't think we've actually used it in our world. So I'm going to click a new material, and I'm going to call this material light, or maybe light bulb. There we go. And let's design this light bulb material. So I'm going to give it a color. What color do I want this light bulb to be? Maybe a yellow light would probably make sense. If it's an emergency light, it might be red. But I'm going to use a yellow light. And we're just going to make it bright yellow. And then down here where it says emission, I'm going to turn that on. And that means it will glow. And I'm going to change the emission color also to a bright yellow. There we go. And I haven't put it on my object yet. So let me go ahead and drag light bulb and put it on the bulb. So there we go. I've got an object that is glowing bright yellow. So this works great, by the way, this material emission thing. If you're ever trying to build neon lights in your world, this is a great way to do it. Just create a material, turn on emission, give it the color you want. So it's glowing yellow, but I want you to notice nothing around the light bulb is glowing yellow. Do you see that? So the light bulb itself is glowing yellow, but it's not giving off yellow light. So how do I fix that? I'm going to select the light bulb, the object which is currently just called sphere. And over here it has a mesh, it has a sphere collider, it has the material that I gave it. I'm going to go down to the bottom, I'm going to click Add Component, and I'm going to do a search for light, L-I-G-H-T. So here's the fun thing about lights. You can create lights as their own objects, which we learned about just a moment ago. Directional light is its own object. The spotlights on my cars are their own object. So you can have light as its own object, or You can have it as a component to another object. You might remember when we did our music in the last lesson, it was the same deal. We could have music as its own thing, or we can have music as part of another thing. So my radio has a component on it called audio source, and that's where the music's coming from. So same deal here with light. Light can be its own object, or it can be a component. So my light bulb that I made here, the one that's just called sphere right now because I didn't rename it. Maybe I should go ahead and rename it. Let's rename it. Light bulb. Okay, so my light bulb object. It has the material on it. I go to add component. I do a search for light, and here it is right here. It just says light. I'm going to click on that. And now I can set up the stats. So right now it has type set to point. So I can choose what type of light am I making. A spotlight, a directional light, a point light, or an area light. We're not really going to talk about area lights that much, probably. These are going to be the best ones. So I'm going to leave it as a point light. You can already see that there is light coming off of this light bulb. Pretty cool, right? So right away, I already have light shining off of this light bulb. Down here, the next one I have is range. So once again, it's already set to 10. I can change that. If I zoom out, I want you guys to notice, you see that yellow circle that is surrounding my light bulb? That is the range. So with a range of 10, that means the light is shining all the way out to this edge. That's the edge of the range of the light. So you can see it on the building. You can also see it on the grass in front of the building. And of course, the farther away from the bulb it gets, the less light you see. So down here at the edges of the circle, it's not as bright as it is close to the front, right? So you can change the range. You can change the color. Right now it's giving off white light, which is fine. I could change it to a yellowish light if I wanted to. Maybe I don't want to go as super bright yellow, but maybe a light yellow. So I can do something like that. There we go. That actually looks pretty cool. And here we have the mode. So here's what we talked about before. Since this light is attached to the building's not moving, there's not a lot happening here, I don't think I need this point light set to real time. If I set it to baked, then that means the light never changes and the shadows never change. But it's possible that I might want the shadows to change, depending on my game. Will I have objects that move in front of this light or not? I don't know. So for now, I'm going to leave it as mixed. I might change that later, but I'm going to leave it as mixed right now. Okay, so I've got intensity. I've got indirect multiplier. So do I want to change the intensity of my light bulb? Right now, I actually kind of like the intensity. But we'll see what it looks like when I get up closer to it. Shadows. It has no shadows. I always recommend turning on shadows for lights. I really do. So the question is, do I want hard shadows or soft shadows? For this type of light, I think soft shadows would actually look a lot better. Now, right now, there's not much near it that should be casting shadows. So maybe I need to put a tree closer to it so I can see these shadows better. But I'm going to do soft shadows. And let's actually, real quickly, let's just go ahead and throw a tree up next to it. Boom. So now I got some soft shadows coming off of that tree. And you can see them on the ground there, right? If I change it to hard shadows, it doesn't look that different from here, but really it's the edges that make a difference. Do they blend or not? All right, so I'm going to leave it as soft shadows for this bulb, and I'm not going to change any of the other settings. So once again, we created an object, we gave it a glowing texture, we gave it the light. I'm sorry, not glowing texture, glowing material. We gave it an emission material to make it glow. We gave it a light. We adjusted the color. We set the light to point. We set the light to mixed. And then I didn't change the intensity, but you might want to, depending on how you're using your lights, right? And now let's go test it out. Let's go see what it looks like when I go find it in my world. All right, so here we go. There's the light, and you can see it is glowing pretty well along the walls of the building. It's doing a great job, honestly. Yeah, that's a good light. It's doing a good job lighting up the front door, making it a little bit safer for people walking by. I like it. I like it a lot. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. With your world, go put some lights in it. Think about the areas of your world that would make sense to have lights. Does it make sense to have spotlights or point lights, right? So decide how you want to decorate your world. When you're done, we have one more thing we're going to do. So, I'm assuming that you are done putting the lights in your world. If you're not, pause this and go put some more lights in your world. But for the sake of this video, I'm done. So here's what I'm going to do to get the maximum effect, to get the maximum realism. Once I'm finished putting all the lights in my world that I want to put in my world, I'm going to go to Window. I'm going to go to Rendering, and I'm going to open that lighting section again that we were looking at earlier. So Window, Rendering, Lighting. And this time, I'm going to where it says Baked Light Maps. Right now, lighting data is set to none. We're going to go ahead and bake our light map. So down here where it says Generate Lighting, I'm going to click on that. What generating lighting does is it's running all the math right now. It's calculating all the light reflections for any of the lights that are in our world that are currently set to baked. Now, right now, I actually don't have anything set to baked, but the light above the door is set to mixed. So that means it will bake, but also have real-time aspects, right? So it's calculating the light effects for any of our baked lights. And then when it's done, we'll have very realistic lighting in those areas, but that lighting isn't going to change at all. It's going to be permanently set in those areas. So is it still baking? Looks like it must be. Oh yeah, down here in the bottom right corner, right here, you can see that it's calculating it, and it looks like it's going to take a while. I wasn't expecting it to take so long. So it must also have to do with the moonlight that I have is probably getting baked as well. That makes sense, because there's a lot of moonlight going on in my world. So we're going to give it time to do that. My moonlight was set to mixed. Yes, it was. So it's baking my moonlight and it's baking the light above my door. The lights that come off the car will not be baked because they were set to real time. So I will fast forward this video to when it's done and we'll take a look at it. Okay, we're back. That did take several minutes to do, even with the very minimum lighting that is in my world. So just keep that in mind. If you ever need to bake your lighting, it's going to take a little while. And the more lighting you have, the longer it's going to take, probably. So I only had 2 lights that they had to bake, the directional light and this light. So let's take a look at it now from the player's perspective. Let's see how different anything looks. All right, so pretty well lit looks like. So the directional light was one of the ones that it baked, and it looks pretty good, looks pretty realistic. That's really the idea behind baking the light, is it just adds to the realism because the computer does all the calculations for the way the light should reflect and shine. And this light also looks really good. Cool, cool, cool. All right, so something I wanted to mention before I go is that once you bake the lighting, it's saving basically what is called a light map. So it's saving how the light is going to work in your world, which means that after you bake the lighting, you shouldn't really be changing your lights. If you change your lights, particularly the baked lights or the mixed lights, if you change any of those, if you move them, you change their brightness, their color, their intensity, you add some more to your map, if you do anything like that, you do need to bake the lights all over again. So you'd have to go back to the lighting section and go back to baked light maps, and you'd have to generate lighting again, right? So baking the light map should really be the last step once you are happy with the way all your lights are working in your game. Then you bake it. Because if you make changes, then you have to rebake it and you're just wasting time, right? You shouldn't be baking your lights regularly. That's something you do at the end. That's why they call it baking. It's like baking a cake. You don't do it more than once. You bake it once when it's done, right? And you're ready to cook it and you're ready to eat it. Okay, so that's the general premise of what we learned today. We talked about environmental lighting, which was right here. We talked about how lights are coming from your skybox and how you can add things like fog and how you can change some of these light settings if you wanted to. We talked about directional light, which we've already been using. We've talked about the new lights, which were spotlights and point lights. We talked about how to make lights as their own objects. We talked about how to make light as a component to an object. We talked about the difference between point lights and spotlights. We talked about the effects that you can change. We talked about the different modes and the difference between real-time, mixed, and baked. So a lot of things that we covered in this video. I hope you learned something new. If you did learn something new, please click the like button. And if you're not already subscribed to this channel, I recommend you subscribe so you can get more lessons and you can keep learning with us. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video, so I hope you have a great rest of your day.